All right, I'm excited. We're joined by Parker Fleming from College Football Graphs and BetUS TV. I have that right?
BetUS, yeah, the BetUS show on YouTube,
Nice.
Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 1:00 Eastern.
Thanks. So Parker does advanced stats as well, different advanced stats than I do, but aiming at the same thing. And the one of the things that like Parker is an old Big 12 hand, having covered the conference through the TCU SB Nation site for a long time. As I recall, you used to get credentialed for Big 12 media days. So a great resource to both, one, sit and talk advanced stats with someone else that does it, but also somebody that knows quite a bit about the Big 12 and follows it. So Parker, welcome. Excited for college football season to be kicking off?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I know we've been trying to get this done for like a week, so I'm glad we finally got it scheduled on my end. But yeah, man, it's a lot of fun. We got some good games this weekend, and yeah, I feel like every year I know I'm getting older because I just get a little more annoyed at the preseason kind of groupthink overhyping stuff, and so it's always a relief when we get real games here and can actually start to put pen to paper and see some real meaningful football. So I'm excited for sure.
Yeah, as someone that does, and probably the thing that I actually enjoyed least is the predictions coming into the season. Yeah. It's the part that actually, oddly enough, does the best as far as like viewability and numbers go. But I think I'm way more excited to talk about the real data based on the real teams in this. So let's hop in. And we kind of talked about this in the lead in a little bit. You know, it's let's start with the Utes. I mean, nearly everything for the Utes depends on Cam Rising being back and healthy and ready to go this season, right? Like it was an unfortunate tour for them last season in QB play. I thought Andy Ludwig was going to be able to get a little bit more out of what they had, and he really wasn't. Defensively, they were still pretty good. I think they have a really, really good run defense in particular that I think is going to translate pretty well into the Big 12. Here's my question, like this, and the schedule. I should say the schedule's pretty manageable. I mean, they miss UCF. They only miss Kansas State out of the potential contenders, and they have the games against UCF and TCU seem pretty manageable, I would say, for the Utes. I mean, what would keep Utah? I mean, outside of the Rising getting injured again, and him running is a component of their game. What would keep the Utes from potentially reaching the expectations that we have for them this season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, kind of the clear favorite here, I think, in terms of just consistency, what you expect out of the coaching staff, and it does feel like they've got a little bit of an edge as there is no, quote unquote alpha dog here. Their defense last year, I mean, even as they struggled, it was high as third in EPA per play, fourth in the pass, third, ninth in the rush, 22nd in echo rate. I mean, just very, very solid, not letting a lot of opportunities. So if something happened, if the Big 12 was like turned into Big 12 2010, where everybody was slinging the ball, I think that they might, potentially they'd give up some explosives there that really might kind of change what they're doing on defense. But even then, I think that, they're going to be poised to play a low variant style of football, high quality, and make it in kind of to the same point. On offense, not only Rising being there, but Brant Keithy is back at tight end as well, and struggled with some injuries last year. That's a guy that's got a draftable grade on him that really changes, what you can do on offense with him. And especially as we've seen, Rob, this offseason, a lot of Big 12 defenses are working on bringing an extra guy down into a box, playing a little bit of a bigger guy at that defensive back position, that Jack, Joker, Cowboy, Star, whatever, they all call it different things, to really look for a run heavy league. And I think that the being in the Big 12, having a defense that can defend against that, and then on offense, having that dual threat at quarterback, plus a beefy guy like Keithy that you can find up the middle. I really think that they're in a really, really nice spot here. And I mean, gun to my head, I would say that I would expect it's more likely than not that they're in the Big 12 championship game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I think one of the things that's interesting about them and Kansas City or any of the contenders, right, is nobody's a juggernaut. And no one's really good enough that if they had a 2 or 3 turnover game that you'd be talking about them like potentially not taking a loss against even one of the like a tier down, I think, in this year. So speaking of the Wildcats, because I think a lot of people have them penciled in as sort of like recession proof, like moving forward here into this season. But I think there's a lot of hype around Avery Johnson, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, I think Will Howard was moving on regardless of what Ohio State offer anyway, right? The but they lose a lot of other production on offense. The offensive coordinator is moving on as well, off to Texas A&M. Truly, and I say this having I grew up in Wyoming. I definitely watched the original version of the North Dakota State offense translate into the FBS. It has been a struggle to make that offense work. They definitely had to change it up at Kansas State and get away from that, I think, to make the offense really open up last season. I have questions, actually, not about the defense. They return a lot on the defensive side. I think they're going to be really good on there and maybe even take a step forward. Offensively, what's reasonable for them? They were a top 20 offense last season. I'm just curious. Anytime you start, you swap in a new play caller, mileage may vary, and we'll certainly talk about this with Kansas too. Is Kansas State as sure of a thing as I think people think?
Yeah, I think there's a couple really interesting facets here. I mean, I had their offense and defense both as top 20 units in EPA per play last year. Very efficient, had some good, good, solid quality guys around that Will Howard could distribute to. And overall, I think they were very consistent. You're hearing some background noise from the daughter who wants to be involved. Sorry.
No problem.
And so if they were just surviving a quarterback change, I think they'd be really well poised to, play a conservative brand of offense, let Avery Johnson grow into it. But that plus losing Klein, I don't think his impact on mentoring quarterbacks can be overstated. And so, DJ Giddens, I think, gives you some explosiveness out of the backfield. It's really good. Wide receiver crew is generally fine. I'm not as excited about them depth-wise overall. And obviously you're losing an anchor with Cooper Beebe and the interior line there as well. So some of those guys, have a little bit more experience than you think. They were injured at different times. And so should be a solid unit, but maybe just not as much offensive upside, which I don't think is a dramatic thing to say about a team that's losing a quarterback, losing some skill position, losing a really good offensive coordinator. I will note Tyler Lockett's half brother is on the roster. So anything in terms of explosiveness there. But what I want to see from Kansas State early on with the new offensive coordinator, with the new quarterback, is what's our identity and our vision for Avery Johnson? You see these quote unquote dual threat quarterbacks so many times struggle early on because it's either they run or it's a deep ball. Right. And can they get Avery Johnson to find those intermediate passes and say, brother, trust your reads, man. Like, we have set this offense out for you. Find what's there. And I know you could get 4 yards rushing. I'd rather get 6 yards passing. Like, let's get the offense going, get those yards after catchability. That's what I'm watching early on out of Kansas State, even in the FCS game. This week, I want to see what they look like in the first couple of drives, just because I want to see how they're going to cultivate an identity after losing Colin Klein, who, Chris Kleiman, amazing coach, great against the spread historically, runs a great program, not the mastermind behind the offense per se. And so what are they going to do to retain that offensive identity there? That's the biggest question for me with Kansas State. If Kansas State misses the Big 12 title game, kind of stealing your question from Utah earlier, I do think it is because Johnson has a lot of skills, but might not have something that he excels at. He might just be decent all around, and they struggle to get that offensive explosiveness going, and they're just kind of mediocre on offense. You could see them with the talent they have being in a lot of one-score games and coming up on the losing side if they can't draw up that identity for him. So without passing a value judgment on whether it's going to happen, that's what I'm most worried about with Kansas State is just it's so much turnover in the offense with the identity of Klein, with Howard, who not only does Will Howard have a PhD in beating TCU, he is one of the most experienced quarterbacks. And you just, between the years, that's so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, and Howard, I mean, he had some issues, downfield passing accuracy, could come back and bite them like you did against Oklahoma State last year.
Yep.
But I think you're spot on with Johnson, and that a lot of dual threat guys, particularly with the wheels that he has, right? And you get used to being the most athletic player on the field very often. And if you're going in against the practice squad, you can really get, not get that full college adjustment in. Is he ready to, sit in and trust his read and then take off? I think that's a really good point. Let's flip over to the Cowboys, because I'm a lot less high on them than everybody that was just looking off of the wins coming into last year. In advanced stats, they weren't great last year. They got lucky. They had some really lucky games. And I think that a lot of people are counting wins and seeing some returning production off of that. And have, I would say among writers, Oklahoma State's more often penciled in a favorite than I would have them. They haven't taken a step forward offensively in a bit, right? Casey, this predates Casey Dunn. Mike Gundy, who I thought used to be like unstoppable at making offensive coordinator hires and just could just hire some guy. Like his last FCS out of the FCS hire didn't work. I don't, and I'm not sure, this is all on Casey Dunn, but defensively they've fallen off steadily since Knowles left. What I guess is like, if you were going to hang your hat on Oklahoma State, making me look really dumb for saying that they got lucky last year and that they were more a product of luck than they were skill on the field. Where does that come from? Because when I look across this team right now, I look and I see a team that was closer to 50 overall on both offense and defense than I saw a team that was closer to the top 20.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. In terms of EPA, they were, in the 30s on average on offense, a little bit better in rushing with Ollie Gordon and some absurd numbers he put up against varying competition. I actually did a study because, Rob, remember last year was the first year in a really long time in the Big 12 that we had asymmetric scheduling. Used to be round robin before that. And I found that Oklahoma State, just based on power ratings, right? If they had played an average schedule as opposed to the schedule they played, they would have been up to 2 wins worse, almost 2 wins worse. So they did get a lot just on the merit. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, yeah, they got a very favorable schedule. We saw them against Texas in the Big 12 title game. Yeah.
That State game, they were like +3 on turnovers, right? Like, like if you looked over the entire season, the turnovers sort of evened out. But in some particularly big games, the turnovers went their way.
Yep. And so the positive spin on that is kind of twofold. One, Mike Gundy has some Schrodingerian qualities to him in that the more you try to put him in the box, the less you know what's going to happen. And I think he enjoys, very much like Gary Patterson, he enjoys not winning. He enjoys winning in a way that you don't expect more than he enjoys just outright winning. Like Gundy wants to win differently. Absolutely. They're going to have a solid rush offense. They're going to have a very experienced quarterback. They're going to have some skill positions that are going to present some interesting matchups. And on defense, they have like 3 or 4 guys who are legitimately, freaks. On the outside, Colin Oliver is, former wrestler, great athlete. That's going to be very disruptive. So I think the experience argument is really, really strong. That being said, I think you and I have been talking about for years, returning production is only as good as, the production that is returning. And even in some examples, like Ohio last year was 120th in returning production on offense or defense, and their defense got way better because all of their players were bad, and so they got new players and they were better. And so this is not one of those cases, though. I don't know that there's like a switch Oklahoma State's going to flip and say, hey, we're experienced and we're going to be better than everyone else. And we're going to access this offensive dimension that hasn't been there before. But I do think the argument for Oklahoma State is you've got a coaching advantage in a lot of games in terms of culture and off-season work. You've got an experience advantage in almost all of your games. Last season, probably you should have done worse and you got some bounces and you stayed healthy and retained that team. And so this year, maybe you get fewer bounces, but maybe you take a little bit of a step forward. And so that brand of consistency, I think Oklahoma State wants to be boring. They want to run Ollie Gordon 40 times a game and just be able to say, hey, line up in the box and beat us. And honestly, this year in the Big 12, I don't think as many defenses can do that as they could have historically. So there is something to be said for that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, like, I think as a lot of most teams' base defense is, five defensive backs on the field, right? And like that 5th defensive back more often than not is still is not an undersized linebacker that's playing safety. It's often the cornerback, right? That is getting most of the playing time. And there may not be somebody in there that can, it's not everybody has the Brent Venables versus Ohio State, where you're getting beaten the run and you actually bring in another defensive back to actually slow down the run. Not everybody has that kind of talent where you're like, oh, I've got a 2nd-round pick I can bring in to play safety, right? I think that's right. They
did struggle with some explosiveness last year. I meant to say this out loud. On defense, I looked at like the idea of like opponent pressure, which is dumb because pressure means something else in football, but whatever, let me have this. And the idea of like how many plays were in your own territory. And Oklahoma State was very low in that. Like, I think only 30% of their plays on defense were in their own territory, which was very good nationally. But you go and look up and you're like, oh, they gave up, as many non-red zone touchdowns as anyone. Like those yards didn't exist because they were scoring touchdowns on those. So they've got to get the explosiveness problem in the secondary fixed. Because I do think that even as teams are going to try to ground and pound a little bit more in the Big 12, if they can give up the big pass, like they're gonna break a lot more than they bend.
Yeah. And in fact, I had their defensive pass rating as their worst defensive metric. I mean, they got smoked a lot defending the pass last year. So let's turn to Arizona, a team that I think if they had made a different offensive coordinator hire, I would be saying is like a team that we should maybe be talking about as like behind Kansas State as 1A or 1B or, Utah. But I think because I think if you look at the losses that they have, you do lose Jordan Morgan, who's a first-round pick, who's going to go play guard in the league. You do have Jonah Coleman, who's off to Washington, and Ephesians Pricesock as well. But I think Arizona actually surprisingly did really well in the portal at running back to replace that. You bring back arguably one of the better quarterbacks in college football. If he were a little taller, you'd be talking about him as a significant, like as a draft pick, draftable guy. Arguably, like I think 1 or 1A, wide receiver in college football. I think with Dwayne Akina, who was the brains behind the operation of their turnaround defensively, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that's better at coaching defensive backs in college football. But at defensive coordinator, I think that they will largely hold serve defensively. They significantly improved last season. I think I would be. It's hard. I'm hard pressed. I think, given some of the inexperience they have on the defensive line, to talk about them improving defensively. But it's hard for me to see them falling off. Like they were kind of a middle of the Power 4 defense last year. That's a big improvement for them. But offensively, they were number 5 in beta rank last season, right? Like I had them graded. They graded out really well with Jed Fish calling plays. That's the engine of the team. That's the engine of their success. And this is sort of a Kansas story too. You have a new play caller again. It's Dino Babers. Dino Babers, who has not in his career been a great offensive play caller, right? Like I think he gets some credit for what he did. What was that tiny school? There's where he had like Jimmy Garoppolo.
But he's at Bowling Green and then he was at Syracuse. Was it
Bowling
Green?
Yeah. It's like he had.
Well, and I mean, he deserves. Look, Dino Babers deserves some sunshine. That's the first thing I will say. Like he has been locked away in the Carrier Dome for years. I'm happy he's out there. He has made some very bad talent look good in certain situations, like the Garrett Schrader first 6 games experience. There are worse situations to plop in than saying like, all right, we've got Fafita, we've got McMillan out wide. Like their team, I feel like is super top heavy in that they've got like a good linebacker, a good defensive back. They've got a great quarterback, a great wide receiver, and then it drops off a little bit. And so if we were talking SEC or Big Ten, I'd be like, yeah, dude, they're going to get steamrolled. But in the Big 12, I think the ceiling defines a lot more than your floor, and Arizona still has a high ceiling. Brennan, as much as this sounds like sports radio bro talk, like Brennan's a winner, dude. Like he does win games and has done good historically. He's got a good sense of culture. I think if Arizona gets a little squirrely with a chip on their shoulder this year, I mean, they could just drop bombs on people on offense, and they just have to be okay on defense to survive. If this becomes a rushing league and Arizona can keep pace on defense, like you're saying, then they're actually super well poised to sneak in and compete for the championship just because their offensive firepower, pound for pound, is as good as anybody's, including Colorado. Like I think that Fafita and McMillan is pound for pound as good as Sanders and Hunter at Colorado. I think that they have the firepower, absolutely.
No, and it's interesting, like because like if I have a question, I mean the offensive, like Arizona snuck through the bowl game against Oklahoma, mostly based on turnovers because the offensive line was suddenly a sieve with Morgan out. I mean, I like the offensive line coach that came in, with Brennan. I do think that like if I need to see it to like I'm at that point. I need to see it a bit to believe it with the offensive line that they're going to be able to make it work. But I agree. I mean, like they like the tight end so much. They're talking about running, some 2 tight end sets, right? Not necessarily just to run the ball and establish the run, but because I think they have an advantage there with Burnett, the guy that transferred in from San Jose State. It's just, it felt like a booster oriented hire of Babers because he was the OC under Dick Tomey during the Desert Storm days, and Aquino was the beast. It was just like, how did we? And the strange thing was like, it was a weird offseason. Kevin Johns from Duke did not get another job as an OC, and I thought he did a really good job.
He
interviewed for the Iowa job. But San Jose State's OC under Brennan, they not only he was like I always respect coaches that are like they may have some injuries or they may have something, but they still figure out how to make it work. And they went from a pass-oriented offense one year to they lost a bunch of wide receivers to injury and graduation, and all of a sudden they're leading the league in rushing and still winning games. And I like that guy actually is still at San Jose State. He is not the offensive coordinator there because Ken Niumatalolo is like, no one is going to accuse me of running the triple option. So he went and hired Aaron. Like, so the guy that I would have come in and I would have been preaching like, dude, this is going to work. Like they've got a guy who's really flexible, who knows Brennan, who knows how to make whatever is in the cupboard, function isn't there. And it's Dino Babers. Like it just feels like it took like a pretty sure thing, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, it could, like, I think it will still largely work. Does it work as well as it does last season? I think.
And for what they lack maybe in X's and O's there, I do think from like administration and recruiting and systems organization, like that's probably a benefit. So who knows if that's a wash, but I think that's fair. What I will say about Brennan that really interests me at Arizona is like definitely one of the less sexy names in the hiring cycle this year in terms of, what you think. But if you look at those teams, and like you just mentioned, one year they're great at passing, one year they get some injuries, they're great at rushing. One year their defense is awful. The next year it's, one of the better G5 pass defenses. And they couldn't sustain those, but it's like, okay, let's give this guy some talent and depth and let's get two sides of the ball clicking at the same time. I can see that vision. So Arizona is very interesting. I don't know. They're too on the radar to be like a wild card or a dark horse. I think we got to reserve that for UCF, but I do think that the vision for them winning is like, hey, the floor is pretty high, but the ceiling is pretty ridiculous. If they can hit the ceiling a couple times in a couple key moments, that really brings it together for them.
I mean, it's like, I think they're a team that could go in and take advantage of the fact that Utah has, like, they did establish a little bit more of a pass rush last year than they had in more recent seasons, but like they have been less good against the pass than they've been against the run a little bit. And McMillan, like if they can keep Fafita upright, like they're a danger, I think, to some of the teams that don't have a great pass defense at the top of the league. All right, I forgot where it was in my questions. All
There's
right.
like a big gap after these teams where it's like, okay, just where do you want to go next? Like in terms of contenders, I don't know who's next.
I'm going to go somewhere where I could end up walking face first into a wall because we've literally seen this stupid movie before, and it's the Iowa State Cyclones coming in, the potential of preseason hype. So look, beta rank is I do not treat time evenly. I have a exponential decay built in to take into account like how you're playing more recently. So like I care about week 0 and week 1 less than I care about week 9 and week 10. Iowa State played a lot better down the back half, and so they really kind of put it together a bit. They weren't great last year, but they were decent. In fact, they were good on both sides of the ball, like an average Power 5 team by the end of the season, right? But they were young. They return a mountain on both sides of the ball, and in that sense, they project like some teams that are showing some improvement. Like a 2015. I'm not projecting Iowa State to the playoff, but like a 2015 Washington, lost some dumb games, was largely pretty good. Now if I feel like you have to preface this with like, if Iowa State doesn't do their usual face plant out the gate where they just do some stupid slow start, lose to Iowa in a game where they outplay them, I don't know how many times that's happened, but barring, sort of taking that out of the equation, right? Like, what are we sort of missing about Iowa State here? Because they've got tremendous continuity. The quarterback is legitimately under the radar for a young guy, really good player. You expect him to take a step forward given how much experience he had and how well he played last season. What are we sort of missing? What am I missing here about Iowa State that is going to come back to haunt me and people are going to be dunking on me in the first 6 weeks of the year?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you're right. We have seen it before. And I try to, with Iowa State, toe the line between like, hey, being good at Iowa State doesn't mean you should go be USC's head coach, right? Like that's not a 1-for-1. That's a very unique job. Right. But also like Matt Campbell has taken that program to places it has not been before. And that's good. Like Iowa State is your exact team that is going to be 5-7, 7-5, and then boom, are we going to hit 9 or 10 wins? Like let's see if we can flirt with that. That's best case scenario there. They did have some offensive line injuries last year too that I think went unnoticed a little bit, which again they just feel weird. I don't know if the media just kind of fell out of love with Iowa State after they did flop in that last season where they had the 7-6 bowl loss to Clemson, where they should have been great and had all those NFL guys. But I mean, Abu Sama is very, very shifty out of the backfield. Their success rates on offense were just downright bad last year. They just weren't great moving the ball, but they had some explosiveness here and there. Two things I really like about that offense, in addition to Sama and Rocco Becht, who I think is legitimately a good quarterback and does not get his due yet. Jaden Higgins is legitimately like a number 1 wide receiver. Last year, Becht and Higgins was like top 10 in yards after catch created, just, simple model of expectation of yards after catch. They did a really great job kind of capitalizing opportunities. That's reflected in low success rate, high explosive numbers. When they connected, they made the most of it. Secondly, Jalen Noel, I think, is a very, very fun player who, what was that, 2 years ago was outside playing just straight up wide receiver and could not handle. That's not his skill set. That's not where they wanted him. They brought him a little closer to the ball last year, put him in the backfield some, line him up in the slot, and him as a gadget guy lets him really get into his skill set. And so I thought they just blossomed with Noel last year as they figured out how to use him. So if they can come out with a good, strong sense of identity, some health on the offensive line, I do think that they have a very competitive offense there overall. They've got to get over the Iowa hump. They absolutely just have to do that. And they did lose Nate Scheelhaus. That's probably my biggest question mark. And the thing that said, like, okay, if this is going south, here's why. Awesome dude, go into the league, deserves it, is going to have a great career in football. You can't say no to that opportunity. Losing him might be the reason that they don't do as well as possible. If he was back, it'd be real hard to kind of poke holes in what they've got right there. The defense is going to be solid. And so I think that the offensive coordinator turnover is just really my red flag.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I that's something we definitely try to point out. All right. I think people are actually a little too high on Kansas coming into this year. I think people are like in projecting Kansas as a dark horse. They're like a worse version of Arizona for me. But worse in that, like, they don't have Dwayne Aquino on the defensive side of the ball to come in and be like, oh, actually, like, this is how you scheme, y'all.
Yeah.
Turns out Arizona just lucked out, and that Dwayne Aquino really likes Tucson, has been trying to get back there, and then actually just is a workaholic and doesn't really want to retire. So, like, the Kansas is in a spot. Their defense was actually really bad last season, but their offense was excellent, like top 7 in beta rank.
With Jason Bean, not even with Jalen Daniels. Like,
I know.
Legitimately looked awesome. Yeah. I think that, like, without Bean, I mean, they had some issues on 3rd and 4th downs, comparatively. They're 8th in early downs EPA. And then on 3rd and 4th down success rate, they were 44th. So they had some issues that you'd like to think, okay, if I have Jalen Daniels' big body in there, maybe we'll convert some of those a little bit better than with Bean. It's a little different skill set. But also, in college football, if you run your quarterback 100 times a game, he's going to get hurt. That's not like, oh, he's injury prone. My question for Kansas is, can you run your offense and keep Jalen Daniels healthy all season? That's not a knock against Jalen Daniels. That's a knock against the style. Is like, you can't just throw him out there all the time and have him bail you out and expect him to play 13 games of competitive football. Well, even Michael Penix was puking on the sidelines last year just from the workload and all that stuff, and was hurt, and he didn't even run that much. Like, it's just hard to do.
And Penix wasn't even like, like early Indiana years where he was like taking off and running a lot, right? Like last year, it was like hang out in the pocket, shuffle around, buy a little time. But I mean, like, Jeff Grimes is the offensive coordinator. Jeff Grimes' best work is pandemic work, right? Like, his best year came at BYU in the pandemic.
Oh, okay. Actually, you want to get conspiracy theories here? Okay. All right. Sorry. I know it's an election year, so we'll keep it very in the box for conspiracy theories here. But I just realized we said COVID and conspiracy really quickly, so I was trying to keep myself between the navigational beacons. But Grimes actually took a step back in the middle of that Zach Wilson year, the year before in 2019, and he was in the booth. And so I think there's some questions about his X's and O's week to week. I would actually point to some of his best work being like 2022 Baylor versus TCU, where TCU won in the last thing, and they threw the God-loving kitchen sink at TCU. They had guards twirling around. They were running super counter stuff that they had never seen. It was just impressive they could install all that and run the plays that year. So I think that he does have some innovation ability and is very interested in that. And if they've got some copies of Kotelnicki's playbook laying around, Leipold has his hands in that, I think that they can do some work there. I'd be more worried about them long-term with like talent acquisition and evaluation. I think even Dave Aranda said, hey, we messed up at the quarterback position. And we made the wrong choice there. And that's largely why Grimes is not there anymore. But to me, Kansas is bread and butter on offense has been innovation. Not just that they do weird stuff, but they have the courage to say, what do we have this year? Let's create an offense. Can Grimes do that to the same level as Kotelnicki? I do not believe so. Absolutely not. But can they put together a good, explosive offense? Yes, if they can avoid running Daniels 40 times a game and getting him exposed to all those hits.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of look at it and I worry that because like, look, play calling is something like some of it's set up, right? Like some of it's having the right play, some of it's having the right play before the right play, right?
Right.
Right. And like they were they were more explosive last season than they were efficient. Like their drive efficiency number was like their ability to sustain long drives, which I mean, I guess if you're going to mirror it around, would be like my version of success rate or something like that. Like it's a little bit different, but it's something like that. It's taking into account, are you keeping the chains moving outside of explosives? So yeah, like I mean, I think Grimes, like if you're like, can you still keep some of the big play juice going? Absolutely. I just like it gets into that question that I have a little bit in the back of my head about Arizona is like, if you're at number 5, if you're at number 7, if you take a step back, this is the engine of the team. If you were talking about like, oh, sure, but Kansas's defense was really bad last season.
Yeah.
And if they like, even for them to take a step forward, you're probably still talking about a bad power 4 defense. If you're talking about the offense where it even fall into like the 20s, all of a sudden you're talking about a Kansas team that is not really a threat at the top that I think people are making it out to be.
Because that's also non-linear, right? From like 15 or 5 or whatever to 20. Like that's a big gap, and that's gonna mess you up. I'll also note in terms of Leipold being a culture guy and Kansas being a team that has to win in different ways and all that. They were really bad at starting field position on offense and defense last year. Their offense was, I mean, they did themselves no favors. And part of that is bad defense doesn't get you a lot of turnovers. You don't get short fields, that kind of stuff. But on both sides of the ball, that feels like, the special teams aspect, at least you'd want to be at least average there. And they were below average on both of those. So that was one thing that flagged me as curious about Kansas too, when we just talk about sustainability, because it is relatively easy in a conference like the Big 12 for someone to come in, build a team and win once, right? Doing it multiple years is very hard. And we've seen guys fail at it. We've seen, guys on the hot seat right now who had, conference championship teams. And so I think that's my worry for Kansas is the defensive depth. Even if they can just put out what they had on the field last year and they get somebody hurt, it's going to get way worse. And then also it feels like they're not doing the margins well for a team that really needs the margins to ascend.
Yeah. I think that's a good call out. So we're going to turn to a whole bunch of teams that basically you could argue have like a lot of the same question. Like we'll start with TCU. So TCU, I think the offense was still pretty good. Look, Sonny Dykes can coach some offense. He can coach some offense. He can hire some offense. That was not his problem at Cal. Cal, he just couldn't get the defense right. He got the defense right in year 1 at TCU. I like the Andy Avalos hire. Like I thought he did a really good job at Oregon, right? Like, and I thought largely, like he's probably a better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, right? Like I think he was maybe heading in the right direction in Boise, but it was not. The patience was out. So I like the Avalos hire. Can they flip it around defensively, TCU? Because like I don't want to say like look, I thought the Josh Heupel offense was largely recession proof. Like I thought after his first year at Tennessee, where he ran the ball a lot and like figured and put up a bunch of choices, like he'll just figure it out if Joe Milton can't connect. Like he did not. There was a recession, right? Like
why did Joe Milton drive by on the Big 12 podcast? Come on, don't disrespect the guy.
I got burned by it because I was like, Josh Heupel will just have it dialed in, and he didn't. I think that like assuming Sonny Dykes is just going to have this dialed in offensively, like I just can't imagine it getting bad. Like they were like 23 on offense in beta rank last season. I think
and they left so much on the table on offense. Like the West Virginia game, they kicked 3 like 40+ yard field goals and missed all 3 of them and lost by a field goal. And so some of that is like I think the defense in my mind gets a lot of trouble. You go just look at their points. Let's just not galaxy brain this. Like they were giving up, sub 25 to basically everybody. The Texas Tech game was one that stood out, but again, they left a lot on offense. Oklahoma, that turned into a garbage time kind of slot fest, and their offense got inflated a little bit because of that. The big knock for me in the defense, and the one that would have turned that season around, is like the defensive response to Colorado dropping 45 and beating them there was we didn't know what it was going to look like on film. Who's your offensive coordinator? What system did you hire from that you didn't expect what was going to be out there. And so I think that might have been, just a little bit of a scapegoat as TCU underperformed from 2022 regardless. I don't think it's really easy for fans to say like, oh, we didn't get pass rush, so we're going to have 4 guys, so we're going to get more pass rush instead of 3 guys down. You're like, no, you didn't get pass rush last year because you didn't have a dude. You had dudes in 2022 and you didn't have a pass rush dude. Like, just legitimately, your defensive line was much worse.
Even if you're just running a 3-man front, you're still sending 4.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, you just didn't have the guys. That's not a magic switch you can flip. I think the defense regressed as we'd expect from 2022. Yep. I don't think it was awful. I had more qualms with the offense leaving so much on the table in the West Virginia, Iowa State, Texas Tech games that all should have been wins, in my opinion. That would have dramatically changed the TCU there. I mean, they could not finish those drives at all. If they didn't get an explosive touchdown, they were attempting a field goal. That's just not going to cut it when you have a defense that is regression.
And the special teams was largely bad. I mean, like, look, the way I do special teams in beta rank, like, field goals end up counting for a lot. Like, this isn't the pros. Like, if you tried to do the way I do special teams with the pros, everybody would look pretty similar because the kickers are all pretty similar. Like, college kickers are not. And so, like, there's a pretty good distribution. And they were at 94. Just because it was not automatic when they lined up to kick field goals. I mean, like, not leaving points on the table, I think would tremendously help. But I mean, like, I exclude those. I mean, the offense gets the generic average credit, like the expected value of a field goal kick from that spot. And they could, again, they're early in the 20s. I think they could get up into the teens offensively. Defensively, they fell all the way down in the 70s. Like, that's the one where it's just for me, like, can they? And again, like, I like Avalos. Like, I thought he was like that. The year that he was the DC at Oregon, they were a defense first team. Like, they really were a really good defense. I think he can clean up some of what they had, for sure. But they're a team that, like, I think overall, like, I mean, you could argue maybe they were a little unlucky last season. Like, they're a team that's probably closer to, if they took a step forward defensively, being a dark horse or being a spoiler for somebody than I think people think coming into this year.
Yeah, I think they've got a very solid 8-4 kind of median outcome there with some defensive regression to the mean positively. And, the offense, they are becoming a little bit of Island of Misfit Toys, taking a lot of drop-down transfers to different levels. They have some guys, Bless Harris from Florida State. They got Brockermeyer from Alabama, who, if you ask TCU fans, was going to start for Alabama this year. If you ask everyone else in the nation, he was not. But I do think some consistency out of the offensive line. Ricker's a good offensive line coach. And Josh Hoover is what he is at quarterback. And I think understanding what he is something that Dykes knows really, really well. The BYU game last year, great to get that guy some confidence, but obviously you saw how that went down the stretch. They've got to be able to run an offense for him. And, Sonny Dykes is one of the few people in America, I'd say, like, all right, given, if I don't know anything about the team beforehand, who could figure it out, he's probably in the discussion for, he'd probably, make an offseason happen there. But I do think their offense is limited in ceiling because of Hoover and the questions along the offensive line, but defense should be a little bit better. I mean, they were 103rd in raw early down ZPA last year. Like, just unacceptable getting pushed around on first and second down. You just can't do that.
So let's flip it over. And I thought, Gus Malzahn getting out of Auburn and going to UCF was largely a good move. Like, I thought he had lost his fastball offensively at Auburn. He's gotten back to more of his spread and run roots. At UCF, sort of found the fastball again offensively last year. They were pretty good. I had him at 17 overall. In steps KJ Jefferson, who on paper looks like an absolutely perfect fit for what Malzahn wants to do, right?
Well, him and RJ Harvey at running back, and then Penny Boone, they could put like almost 7,500 pounds of man in the backfield and just run the Gus Malzahn offense. You're like, okay, I'm in. I did a deep dive on their roster for something else the other day, and the offensive line, including the transfers they brought in, Rob, they have 10 guys, a full 2 deep of guys with at least 4 years of experience in college football at the offensive line. Like, they are ready for down the stretch. Last year, one team in college football, with the limitations they had last year, one team in college football had more than 3 yards before contact on average on designed runs, UCF. Everybody else was like low 2s and then in the 1s there. They can scheme it up. Absolutely. A lot of that is because they do a lot of designed quarterback runs, and those are good. I think if Javon Baker had come back, we'd be talking about UCF as, potentially a not a dark horse, but they do have some question marks in the wide receiver room, and you're going to have to access that a little bit on the explosive plays. But I think they're absolutely in the mix for win the games you should, steal one or two that you shouldn't, and you could be in the Big 12 championship very, very easily.
Well, Jefferson's got the beef to take the hits too. Like he's a
absolutely
man, right? Like, but defensively, I only had him at 50 last year, and like I would say, look, they're probably out of the ones we're going to talk about. Like, hey, if the defense could figure it out, like their defense is actually the least bad of the defensive.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if they could figure it out, like,
and they brought in like what 4 P4 guys that are going to be in the mix. Like they're trying.
50,
yeah,
50, you can make a jump into the 20s or 30s in the offense, and all of a sudden you are talking about a real, honest to goodness dark horse there. And that's where like I'm interested in, like, do you think defensively that they could get enough? Because otherwise, like, look, what you're talking about is in those games, you're just hoping to be +1 or +2 on turnovers, which is not a bad strategy, but it's there's a little bit of hope in that too.
Yeah, or like the Baylor game last year where they were up 30 to something with a backup quarterback, and then the wheels came off, and you're like, okay, that doesn't, that is what it is, whatever. Right. I think the name of the game is consistency for the defense. Too many explosives in the run game, and maybe bringing in some secondary guys with a little better tackling is the way that you do that and make those chunk plays, 6 yards and not 60 yards. I think that goes a long way for UCF. Kind of overall, they were slightly better at the pass than the rush last year on defense. They're almost average in EPA on defense there. Their success rate numbers were better than their explosiveness. So again, underlying factors, I'm going to say that efficiency is a lot more stable than explosiveness. So maybe some better long tail outcomes for them in terms of explosiveness. I do agree that they're probably like the least bad of the, if the defense works teams. Schedule's really nice. You do get Utah, that stinks, but otherwise I feel like they're really poised to bank some wins in an asymmetric schedule. That's all you really need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I will give the Big 12 credit. I mean, like because having done the preview in the other three big conferences, like the schedule is less of a factor across the Big 12. Yeah. Like everybody's got about one miss. I mean, like you can go through the ACC schedule or the Big 10 schedule, and you can just look and be like, well, that team's going to rack up some wins, right? Like, and maybe be a paper tiger. Let's hop over West Virginia. Back from the dead, Neil Brown. Like he's Lazarus, and he's come back to us.
Is he? They traded years for buyout. I think that's something that gets misses. Everybody sees the extension, and like I like Neil Brown. I think he's a good coach. I think that all coaches have limitations, but the like Neil Brown is back thing. I think what I was saying at the end of last season was like, you should absolutely celebrate the season as a West Virginia fan. If last year changed your opinion of Neil Brown, you're doing a bad job at evaluating programs.
Oh yeah. I mean, he absolutely because I do think that they have some wonky. I don't think he's made the best coordinator. He waltzed into a good coordinator hire that made that he has kept. I mean, he's back this season. Their OC is back, and the quarterback worked. Right. I mean, like those go together.
And sort of like they were 8-4 in the regular season. Baylor missed 2 key field goals. TCU missed 3 field goals. Other than that, they're 6-6. And I think we're talking about something different. So the margins are really thin. And Garrett Green is super easy for people to go to a certain stats website that ranks players from 0 to 100 and puts a nice color next to it and say, oh, Garrett Green, 94. Look at that. Isn't that great? He's a great passer. And think, where were his passes? What were they doing with those? He threw fewer passes than any other Big 12 starter last year. He threw fewer passes in 12 games than Josh Hoover did in 8 games for TCU. So the selection and the volume there, I think what we're going to see out of Big 12 teams is saying, okay, let's see that Garrett Green passing game. Let's stack the box a little bit. Let's spy the quarterback run and make him beat us downfield in man coverage, ball placement situations. And if Green does that, amazing. That is a dimension of his game we have not seen at all. And he doesn't even have the underlying metrics where we think, hey, maybe he's going to access that.
Yeah, I mean, look, underlying that still is the defense was really bad, and the defensive coordinator's back. I'm just like, I think, like Neil Brown, to your point, like, I mean, he's wasn't fired at the end of last year, but he, like I don't think I love the process. I think he's maybe got another year on life if it works with Chad Scott again this season at OC, right? And then Chad Scott's going to get hired for another bigger job, and then he's got to figure it out again, and that might be the end of Neil Brown. Right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And like I don't think losing Zach Frazier is just an easy thing to mitigate on the offensive line. You saw the thing about him that was so cool, and I'm not a draft expert, whatever, but like when you go look at clips of West Virginia's successful plays, the center is always in them because he is running
Yeah.
downfield and hitting somebody, clearing lanes, like pulling out and kicking out on the blocks and all that. So I think they've got a good culture on the offensive line. They are losing some really, really good talent there, even as they have some talented guys in like Milam at the tackle position. But it does feel in a lot of ways that if kind of phrasing it in the question we said before, if West Virginia falls flat, we'll say like, yeah, they won with a lot of heart on some close margins last year, and you can't do that again. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like obligatory. We have to talk about Colorado. So let's finish with that.
Yeah.
Look, I feel like even by the standards of like a modern rebuild in the new college football era, like Colorado, even more than most, feels like they are just doing this, building the plane in the air. Like it just feels constantly unsettled and unstable. And I think that, like, and I say that is like, that's most rebuilds these days, right? Like, I mean, you're going to bring in a lot of players, right? Like if you're coming in and taking over a program that truly, like Colorado was abysmal at the end before Dion came in. So like, I get the need to like do a full roster turnover. Like I also like, I mean, let's be frank, like Shadur Sanders is really good. The wide receivers, I think, even beyond Hunter, have some real talent that was really young last year and could be also really good this year as well. The offensive line was really bad. Yeah. The front seven was horrendously bad. And you could, like, I remember, like, they kind of gave Arizona a game. Arizona was on the road last year, and Arizona kept throwing the ball. And I was like, do you guys not watch film? Like, yeah. Like, do you guys like why is anyone just not pounding the ball down Colorado's throat because they cannot stop the run? I have a hard time coming in. And look, I mean, I think people tend to, you and I talk about this, like sometimes the returning production's bad. I will say, like Colorado, when they got to that Mike McIntyre Pac-12, championship, that they had, like it wasn't a championship, but it was a runner-up that they had where they won the division. They had some guys 3 years before that they came in and played that were freshmen, and they were bad, right? Like, and they took their lumps. And then the next year they got a bit better, and then the next year they got to get better on defensively. And then, like, by year 3, the secondary, which had been a bunch of like true freshmen that they started, they got torched, was actually really good and like the strength of the team. I don't think that that's the case here with this. Like, it's hard for me to see this Colorado offensive line just because you can't go to the portal and rebuild the line. You just can't, like, unless you have infinity dollars or you're the Ohio State Buckeyes with that bank account. Like, you just can't go like shopping in the portal for a whole line. You can't go shopping in the portal for a whole front seven. I'm skeptical on the OC hire too, on top of it, right? Or the new OC. But like with Colorado, like I mean, look, there's just dazzling pieces. I mean, and I feel like you can easily fall into that. Like, I don't think Colorado is good enough that we should talk about them as a conference title contender. I think that they're interesting as a potentially bowl eligible team that is a spoiler, because the top end talent, when it works on a couple plays, can absolutely put points on the board.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the role they're looking at. And from like a normal non-chaotic program standpoint, like that's a step forward for them, is like get bowl eligible this year, do it again next year, and like start to build the pieces. I don't know if they're really interested in that. It feels like they're kind of looking for, flash in the pan. Honestly, I thought about it a little bit. It feels like, when I was done with PhD coursework and I started moving my dissertation, like the first 3 months, I got an idea, I got some data, I got some graphs, and I was like, this is amazing. This is going to get published, whatever. Showed it to my advisor, and he's like, okay, cool. Where's like the lit review? Where's like this alternate proof in the appendix? Like, you have 5 years of work here. You can't just like show me a graph and say, hey, this is going to change the face of economics forever, right? And I feel like Colorado's doing that a little bit, where it's like they do have some legitimately amazing skill position guys. And I think they I do believe they expected to go 10-2 last year. And just come in and say like, hey, we're going to win. And I just don't, that's not how this works.
Do you feel like in camp that because the front seven was so bad and the offensive line was also bad, that they just had no idea?
Yeah, they're just not well calibrated. I mean, and there's some funny stuff. Like I'm going to take Sean Lewis's side in that. There's stuff that came out from other coaches that were like, good for him getting out. It seemed like a really bad situation. The way they kind of dogged him and blamed a system that has worked at the highest level of college football for years across multiple areas of defense is insane. Shedeur Sanders had a 25% sack to pressure rate. He was taking pressure too much. He's dropping back in the pocket like he's in a video game. You saw the clip where he played CFB 25, and his first play, he ran his own character back, ran around a bunch, and then got sacked and blamed the offensive line because he didn't step up in the pocket. Like you've got to step up in the pocket, and he just does not do a good job at that consistently. They'll make some dazzling plays. If they win, it will be someone has their worst game, and Colorado connects on a couple of those big deep plays. But again, I think bowl eligibility is absolutely in play, and for a normal program without all the hoopla, I do believe like that's a good step for them. You're a Western guy. I think you agree with me on this. Like Colorado should be such an easy job to recruit everyone to, and just be like, hey, we're in the mountains. We're in an awesome city. We've got a cool stadium. Like the vibes are great. A bunch of California girls come out here. We all hang out and have a good time. Like I just feel like those are the pitches people are making across the country, and Colorado has as good a claim to that as anyone. And it should be easy to just build them into a good program.
I mean, I definitely am aware that like Boulder as a lifestyle definitely appeal. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. But then I'm also like, it's a little white.
There's definitely some trade-offs. Real estate market's not great,
but like it's like Santa Fe.
I went to the TCU game a couple years ago and I was like, oh, I was shocked. The student section showed up. It was great. They've got good facilities. Like they should be able to build. And so I think that's like, it's not necessarily a knock on Prime to say like, yeah, it's a hard job. You're going to lose a little bit and you're going to win a little bit. If he was going to be there for 10 years, and was playing out in public. No, he doesn't want to be there 10 years. If he was going to be there 10 years, by the end of those, year 5, I'd be like, yeah, dude, I think there probably should be in contention for like making a playoff spot. But I think they expected that from day one. And that's just not a good way to build a sustainable program.
I think the concern that I have there is that like I think he clearly wants it out. Like I think he does. I think he wants the biggest of big jobs that he can land. And like, has he built like that? Right? Like, did he make personnel decisions? Has he made like? And also, I mean, and I think this is totally reasonable too. Is like, has he catered too much? Like, and I say this is like because I think people can be too critical of. Like I think it can sometimes fall into like. You know what? Like, yes, but like Colorado was awful. They're clearly better. Are they a national championship contender? No. Can we just not let's just not even have that conversation and we'll all seem smarter. But I do think that like sometimes he can cater to his kids a little bit too much within the program and like not have the hard conversation with your quarterback about what he's doing back there in the pocket, right? Yeah. Like and like the reality of the like I mean, because look, Caleb Williams last year played behind an awful offensive line and did not somehow have like very good receivers at USC and made it work, with the amount of scrambling that he did. Like the amount of scrambling he did last year was mostly to like buy time. And there were times when it didn't work too, right? Like, but like the year before when he didn't have to, like he did scramble, but there was like guys open, like it clearly worked better. He definitely took more sacks last year and pressures. But I think you could see with Williams, like he kind of understood the difference, right? And that's where Sanders just doesn't seem to understand the difference. Like, I mean, look, it's not like his job's not easy. They have no freaking running game. He's under constant pressure, right? Like I get it. Like he just needs to be willing to take incompletions and throw the ball away. Yeah. All right. I've taken an hour of your time. I really appreciate this. This is a great conversation, and you know a ton about the Big 12, and I appreciate that you're so dialed in on it still. And where can people find you for this coming college football season, which you do this like this is more you're full of time across it.
Yeah. So no, that's great. And I appreciate you having me on, and I always love talking ball. The best place is on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, Stats War. We'll put some stuff out there. Did release a little teaser today. We'll have some stat previews up and some stats on a website that looks much better, looks way more like it wasn't just crafted on my terminal in R and actually looks official and all that. And you'll even be able to compare different teams, which I've never done before. So you can create a matchup. It should be some really cool stuff there. But Stats War on Twitter is kind of the place to get dialed in. And then on YouTube, BetUS College Football Show, Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 1:00 Eastern. We're starting 2 a week beginning tomorrow. So tune in for that as well.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and this is going to wrap us up. Like I am done with previews, which is like barely in the nick of time. Like
awesome. All over but the shouting now. Now we just got to play the games. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Parker.
Thanks.